service, Judaism, and disability inclusion. We have a lot going on tonight, so I'm going to orient us first. First and foremost, we will name that there are a lot of Miranda.
Oh, Molly, you went on mute for a sec. Sorry about that.
Hey guys.
Apologies about that, having some Zoom hiccups. So you might have noticed that there are a few Mirandas in this call. If you've noticed that you have entered as Miranda, it's a little bit of a Zoom mix-up, but we'd love for you to update your Zoom name. If you hover over the corner of your screen with your video, there are 3 dots, and there's an option to rename yourself. So if you'd like to put in your name with your pronouns and the city that you're calling from, that would be great, and then we'll know who you are. So thank you for making the time to be here this evening. We want to acknowledge that we are at the end of JDAM, Jewish Disability Advocacy and Inclusion Month. We're also at the end of Black History Month, and tonight is the Jewish holiday of Purim. So quite a bit going on this month of February, and we are excited for you to join us for this program. We want to take a moment to acknowledge why we decided to run this program tonight, and why we feel this work is important. We feel that the Jewish community has a lot of work to do when it comes to access and inclusion for people with disabilities, and Repair is certainly a part of that. We started by having a conversation this month internally, and thinking about what we can do at Repair to make our programs more accessible to people with disabilities. We did a training for our staff, and we were really excited to host this program to continue the conversation with the wider audience, with all of you. And we want to acknowledge that this is not just one program, but we are excited to have this be the start of the conversation. And we're excited to be joined by folks from all 13 of our Repair cities, and folks from all over the country. We also want to acknowledge that COVID has presented some unique opportunities, and some different opportunities to have the conversation about inclusion and access. And Miranda Rosenblum, the one Miranda Rosenblum, my colleague, who's waving, runs virtual service programs at Repair nationally. And we found that many of the accommodations and access requests that people with disabilities have been asking for ages now are commonplace with some virtual programs. So for example, you'll see there's live captioning that's available at the bottom of the screen. Zoom now has this automatically on all calls. We also have an ASL interpreter, 2 interpreters who will be switching off. So you'll see them spotlighted as well. We're also going to record the call this evening. So those are a few of the access needs for this program specifically that we wanted to bring to your attention. So I'm very excited to be able to introduce our panelists tonight. The first is Judy Heumann. Judy, you should really read a whole Wikipedia article about Judy. It's very difficult to try and summarize Judy's work in a paragraph. So instead, I will give you a few highlights, and you can do some research on your own as well. Judy is a lifelong disability rights activist. She's produced significant contributions in human rights legislation and policies, such as the 504 Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Additionally, Judy worked with the World Bank and State Department to bring disability rights into international development. Judy was the special advisor on international disability rights for the US Department of State, appointed by President Barack Obama, and Judy's work with the Ford Foundation on advancing the inclusion of disabled people in the media. She's the author of the memoir Being Human and a star in the Netflix documentary Crip Camp. Thank you for
a friend of Molly's. And a friend of Molly.
Yes, very honored to call you a friend. Thank you, Judy. We are also joined by Matan Koch, who is a lifelong disability rights activist. He's currently the Director of California and Jewish Leadership at Respectability and has supported, served, and advised a variety of organizations on inclusion, from national Jewish bodies and individual synagogues to nonprofit organizations and bar associations. Additionally, Matan is a graduate from Harvard Law School and a lawyer, in addition to all those things, and has worked with President Obama as well as an appointee to the National Council on National Council on Disability. Very hard to put your bio in a paragraph as well. Thank you so much for being here, Matan. Finally, we're excited to welcome Ian Marshall, who is calling in from his hometown of Brooklyn, New York. Ian was a participant in the summer and fall service corps with Repair the World, and to be in the spring, I believe, as well. Community service has long been a part of his life since college, when he joined a co-ed community service fraternity. He continued this love for community service by interning with the community center after graduation and spent 10 months assistant teaching in Israel. Thank you for making time for us tonight, Ian. Finally, last but not least, I'm excited to introduce our moderator, Rachel Figersmith, my colleague at Repair the World. Rachel is the executive director of Repair the World New York City. In a previous life, Rachel worked in education and has been a fierce advocate for disability rights in the many nonprofit spaces she's found herself in. Rachel has multiple invisible disabilities, is a trained special educator, professor of neurodiversity in the Jewish community at Hebrew College, and a parent of 2 young children. Wonderful. Thank you all for making the time, and I will pass it on to you, Rachel.
Hello, everybody. I know some folks trickled in as we're getting started, so I'd like to also give a little bit of framing of what Repair the World is as we jump in. Repair the World is a national nonprofit. We work at the intersection of social justice and Jewish worlds. We aim to make service a meaningful part of Jewish life, and we do that in many ways. We're so excited to have all of you with us, and Molly offered at the beginning that here at Repair the World, we really believe that inclusion is central and part and parcel of what we do in all of our work. So disability access is part of that. I'm excited to see another small person, although I hope you don't see mine tonight. As Molly said, tonight falls at the end of JDAM, Jewish Disability Advocacy and Inclusion Month, at the end of Black History Month, and as we're beginning the Jewish holiday of Purim. We're grateful that you're choosing to mark all of these intersecting moments with us, and we want to call everyone's attention to an important theme of the Purim holiday. Some of you who might be practicing Jews might be recognizing some similarities and threads between disability access and the Purim holiday. The thread that I see that's most significant is this concept of leaders being unmasked. And we're going to be applying that concept to conversation tonight and invite you to continue that conversation as well. I would like to start with this. The history of the disability rights movement in the United States is extensive and more than we can cover in a panel discussion, but we're lucky to be joined by a multi-generational panel of activists tonight. We're going to start by showing a short clip of where we're coming from. Judy Heumann, who's a panelist with us tonight, in 1977 during the hearing in the midst of a longest sit-in in US history, which resulted in the signing of the 504 regulations, the first federal civil rights act protecting people with disabilities, is featured in this clip. And so we're going to share it with you now as we start this conversation.
The harassment, the lack of equity that has been provided for disabled individuals, and that now is even being discussed by the administration, is so intolerable that I can't quite put it into words. I can tell you that every time you raise issues of separate but equal, the outrage of disabled individuals across this country is going to continue. It is going to be ignited. There will be more takeovers of buildings until finally maybe you begin to understand our position. We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. We want the law enforced. We want no more segregation. We will accept no more discussion of segregation. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
Thank you. Judy is a trailblazer of the movement. We want to start this conversation by talking about pivotal moments, and we'd like to invite you to talk about pivotal moments that stand out for you. And that's where we'd like to start.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you. And let me please explain what I look like for those of you who are blind or low vision. I am a white, wearing a Jewish star woman with brown hair that's under my ears. And I have red glasses, and I'm wearing a scarf, which is multiple colors, oranges and reds and blues. And I'm wearing a top that is maroon. We're in my foyer, my husband and my apartment in our foyer, and there are pictures of family and all types of different things and plants. So I think for me, what has been most important is to see the evolution of the disability rights movement and to see how, as Jews with disabilities, we really have begun to more seriously address what does it mean for Jews to be a part of the Jewish community, and what are we talking about when we're looking at issues of justice and non-segregation and equality. I think for many people, not just in the Jewish community, but more broadly, we've looked at disabled people as objects of charity and pity. We've looked at donating to charities and doing research on curing disabled people. I'm not telling you not to give money to charities. I'm not saying that at all. But I think the charities that you are giving money to, you may want to be looking at organizations that are really helping disabled people and family members gain their voices, be able to understand what laws exist, like Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and be supportive of helping to ensure that disabled people of all ages, and whether or not we have visible or invisible disabilities, or what the color of our skin is, or our sexual orientation, or what our religion is, on, that as Jews, we are really here to create tikkun olam, to help repair the world. And certainly in the area of disability, I think for me, it's been very difficult over the last number of decades to really honestly talk about what it feels like not to feel like I'm really a part of the Jewish community. And I think I can give you a couple, but one very quick example. There's something, the Jewish, as we all know, the Jewish weekly papers from around the country. I grew up in Brooklyn, but I lived in California for about 18 years. And in the Jewish Weekly, there was an application for a Jewish dating service. And I applied because there were two questions. One, did you have a disability? And the other was, would you consider dating someone with a disability? So of course I said, yes, I had a disability, and I would consider dating someone with a disability. And you were supposed to get 3 to 5 names back in like a couple of weeks. This is in June. I went to Israel that summer. It was the first time I was in Israel. And I came back and it was like September. And I remember thinking, I never got an answer. I sent my money in. And I asked a friend of mine to go get the mail. And he got the mail. And there it was. There was a letter, an envelope from the dating service. And I opened it up and the check fell on the ground. And the letter said, there was no one who matched my areas of interest. And if they found anybody who did, they would get back to me. Now, maybe they got back to you, they didn't get back to me, but I think it really is a powerful statement, because at least at that time, what it really said is there was a likelihood of nobody wanted to date someone with a disability. Because I know my areas of interest were not that different, because I filled out all the boxes. So, and I think we all may have stories of things like this that have happened. And one other final point, as I've been doing many of the JDAM events around the country, it has been interesting to hear more disabled individuals with visible and invisible disabilities really begin to talk more honestly and forthrightly. And I think that's because of work like we're all doing, where we're allowing and encouraging honest discussions to happen, where people talk about how they don't really feel like they belong. And I think we need to discuss, what does it mean to belong? Why are we feeling we don't belong? When do we feel we are belonging? And what more do we feel has to happen? Thank you.
Judy. Matan and Ian, I'd love to invite you to speak to pivotal moments that you see in the disability movement as well.
Ian, would you like to go first? Or?
Sure. Well, all right. I don't know if it's pivotal, but it was important. Joining Alpha Phi Omega, I have actually been involved in community service in high school, but that's beside the point. There was we did a collaboration with a disabled organization that I'm not sure that I unfortunately can't recall the name of, but it simulated what it was like to be in a wheelchair, to be blind. But I think significantly for me, as I'm not in one, what it's like to have ADHD or ADD rather. So yeah, that was great because I felt represented for the first time in a while. Having an invisible disability that was pretty significant. So I can turn it over to Matan.
So I'm not sure whether you want me to answer the question in terms of pivotal moments for the movement or pivotal moments for me, because I think those are very different questions, right? Like my own life.
To do both.
Do both. Okay, so I think a pivotal moment for the movement, and I wrote about it recently because of the 30th anniversary of the ADA, was the ADA passing, but now that's something you can read about. What I want to talk about is the pivotal moment in my own life that is an odd reflection of, so as you know, the ADA was passed in 1990. The public accommodations provisions of the ADA became effective in 1993. And then in 1996, I had the weirdest experience. I was 15. I was really accustomed to not being able to get in places. And so when I went somewhere with my Jewish summer camp, and we were on a field trip to New York City and places were not accessible to me, I was pretty much ready to accept it. I think that was just life. I'd go places I couldn't get in. I'd go somewhere else. And what was fascinating to me, I was with a group of kids from Kutz, the Reform Movement's Jewish Leadership Academy, and it was how the expectations of my trip mates were so different than mine. How upset they got, how upset they were that I could not follow. And I realized that in just 5 years, the expectations of people who did not have disabilities were beginning to change. That people without disabilities were beginning to look and say, maybe this isn't right. Maybe it's not okay that our friend is with us from summer camp can't go where we're doing. And it was absolutely mind-blowing for me, because I'll be honest, I was always taught that the way to keep my happiness as a wheelchair user growing up in the 80s was to just accept there were lots of places I couldn't get in and focus on the ones that I could. And it was really interesting to see that attitudinal change of like, no, this isn't right. This is not how it should happen.
I mean, I think that's a really important point, because the question would be, had you not been with them at the camp and had they not been exposed to other people with disabilities, would they have felt your indignation? And I would say we don't know. I think, obviously one of the issues around meaningful inclusion is you were doing everything with everybody else, and you were 15 years old and they were your friends, and they saw that, oh no, you couldn't do things with them. And I think it was probably a good history lesson too, for them to understand that for many, many decades, building things accessible, or providing interpreters or captioning or giving extra time, whatever the issue may be, were things that did not occur. And that these changes that are being made are to enable us to participate more. But then in the end, ultimately for so many other people who may not identify or may not wish to disclose, benefiting from what we've been able to help achieve.
Thank you both for that. I also think we've kind of yet to see what will unfold, but I think a pivotal moment in history is going to be the response to the pandemic and how suddenly so many things have become accessible that for so long were not, or that was the party line for so long that this was not possible, and we're suddenly seeing the doors open wide. I want to turn, as we were talking about, JDM and Black History Month intersect, which is an interesting and complicated thing. We know the 504 sit-in was an intersectional event and that there were people with different disabilities, that the Black Panthers were instrumental in delivering meals and being part of the movement. When and how have you seen the disability rights movement work in coalition with other justice movements? Any of you can start.
I mean, I think that's something that's been evolving for a number of decades now. Certainly the 504 demonstrations illustrate how the organizing in the Bay Area really reached out to labor unions, the religious community, the women's movement, people of color movement. The Black Panthers were involved because one of their founding members had multiple sclerosis. And he was involved with the Center for Independent Living and with organizing the demonstration. So he was the one that got them involved, but then Glide Memorial Church, if any of you out in California, the Bay Area know, at that point, Cecil Williams was the head minister and he had been doing a lot of work in the area of disability with us. And then I think, what we've seen since really 1980, so the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, when it was established, convened a meeting with other major civil rights organizations in the areas of, at that point, race and gender, to basically talk with them about injustices in the area of disability and to get their support for the creation of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. Now, I think it would be completely wrong to say over that 40-year period of time that things have been achieved as we wish, but I think certainly much more dialogue, much more clarity on understanding the link of poverty and disability and the ability of the disability community itself to be moving in the right direction of becoming a more socially just movement where we are proactively working to ensure that disabled individuals, regardless of their religion, in fact, are protected.
Matan, do you want to share as well?
Could I ask maybe to stop muting my mic just because it's actually very difficult for me to unmute. So each time I have to pause and do that. So yeah, I think that a part of it that I have seen is a growing recognition of intersectionality. And I realize a lot of people think of it as, a word we like to throw around to talk about it, but it's so true that disability intersects every other category of social justice movement that I have worked with, that I've encountered, but that we all also intersect each other, right? So I'm privileged to sit on JFNA's JEDI Council, Jewish Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Council. And the whole point of said council is that within the Jewish experiences are all of these experiences. There's the experience of being Jewish and a person of color. There's the experience of being Jewish and disabled. There's the experience of being Jewish and LGBTQ. There's the experience of being Jewish and multiple of those different categories as well. So we sort of look together and we say that intersectionality isn't about supporting each other's movements as if they were separate things. It's about supporting each other because we're actually all a community of folks that have different bits of privilege and different bits of disadvantage, and we have to support each other. If what is the old expression? We won't have equity for anyone until we have equity for everyone. And I think that, there is a truth to that statement, but there's also a facility to that statement, by which I mean it only really becomes true if we embrace it and fight for it. Otherwise, it's a little too easy to say, well, let's just get the best I can for me. So.
Thank you. That is really powerful, and I think important as we as we're thinking about what does it mean to be intersectional, what does access actually mean. There's a
If
lot
I
of
could add something to this, within our community, many synagogues have social action committees, and many other committees, LGBTQ committees, Jews of color committees, and what I've been talking about is exactly what Matan is discussing. Within our synagogues, we need to be looking at issues around disability as not being something which is just off on the side and is just looking at issues around access. Access is very important because if we don't have access, regardless of what our disability is, obviously it makes it really more difficult to really be included. But when we look at issues around racism and sexism, etc., within our communities, in our own synagogues, we really need to be learning how to work together on multiple issues. Because at the end of the day, we are presenting ourselves, I'm a white disabled Jewish woman. And all of those things are important to me. My being a woman, my being Jewish, and my having a disability. And I want people to understand the types of issues when we're dealing with social justice, if we're dealing with gun control, if we're dealing with food, if we're dealing with homelessness, the numbers of disabled individuals who also reside within those different communities. So we have to understand more in depth what we are doing within the community in order for us to also really appropriately be supportive and help make change.
Absolutely. I'm going to pivot us a little bit, and we'll probably be returning to some of this conversation, but I'd like to talk about service and volunteering specifically and ask Ian to share some experiences. Ian, we know you've had experience in multiple Jewish and secular volunteer programs and initiatives as a person with a disability. Would you tell us a bit about your experiences and why service is important as a young Jewish person?
Well, I think to me, again, it's been varied. When I joined the community service fraternity, I pretty much volunteered every single weekend because it was a way. I kind of joke, it's a way to get out of the house, but also, it's just a way to give back, whether it be doing environmental cleanup. I went to school in American University in DC, so environmental cleanup at various parks like the National Mall, helping kids with disabilities that do taekwondo, that sort of thing. And I don't know, I think it's important, again, stressing tikkun olam, repairing the world. And I think we're the next generation. We have a responsibility to take care of it. Certainly with challenges of global warming, education and tutoring. We want to come and we want to make it a better place. And I think the great thing about doing community service is that it's a great equalizer. It doesn't matter what race, gender, sexuality, disability, or economic class. Everyone has taken time out of their day to come and do a common goal. So it's you're bringing your best self. You're valuing your work. It's more nuanced. Everyone feels good to do it. And I think I think a big thing to maybe better the spaces is like clarification for asking questions, since I think as someone with ADD, sometimes I don't get it the first time. So I think it's important to stress clarification, making sure you're on the right task, but then also encourage creativity and openness.
If it's okay, Ian, I'd like to also carry forward on that, because the point that you're making of sometimes you need someone to repeat something. The other day I was involved with another synagogue where a couple of people had speech disabilities. And your situation's a little bit different. You're needing to ask other people to repeat. And they were talking about how if people don't understand them, they frequently just ignore them or don't invite them to participate. So I think the issue of, on both sides, someone who is with someone and you don't understand what they're saying, and it may not be because they have a speech disability. It may be because they are speaking too softly. All of you who have ever been to a meeting, and I've experienced this forever, if someone is speaking softly and you can't hear them, how many times will someone say, could you please repeat that? That phrase, I mean, I will lean over to the person next to me on my left and my right, and I'll say, what did they say? And they'll say, I don't know. And I'll say, why isn't anybody asking? And then I'll be the one to say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. But I think this is a very important point, because it does impact people who have ADD or learning disabilities or a hard of hearing, or have a speech disability. The ability just to simply say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? And I think it's a difficult thing for people to say. Sorry, Ian.
No. I also want to say also, I think also giving people, if we're doing services or something like that, the ability to make it something optional is, I think, interestingly, I think it also allows people to be a little bit more open, and they don't feel uncomfortable or forced to do something that they don't want to do. So, yeah, that's a big thing, because if sharing text, sharing prayer books when doing services, for example, like I've done many times at Repair the World at 808 Nostrand.
That's we talk about, Ian, I'm really struck by you bringing this, and we talk at Repair, particularly over MLK weekend, this concept that everybody can be great because everybody can serve, that everybody can serve, right? This idea that volunteering is accessible for all. And we know that there's so much more work to do in making volunteering accessible for all. Matan, I wonder if you have more to add, and also Ian and Judy, feel free, but around what would make volunteering look more accessible.
Well, actually, I'm glad you went there, because this is what I was thinking as Ian was speaking, right? Which is that when I was Ian's age and a little bit younger, most Jewish volunteering opportunities would not have been accessible to me. The mitzvah corps, the mitzvah buses, the things that people went around and did, I would hear of my friends doing them, and just no question, I couldn't do it. And so I don't think that what would be useful is to sit here on the panel and list a few random accommodations, because the number of different things that different people need. What I'll say instead is have a process of accommodation. Have a process where you start by communicating that you want the volunteering opportunity to be open to everyone, that you mean it. Have a person who is responsible for receiving the requests, where people explain what it is that they need for volunteering to be accessible, and have gathered as much resource and know-how and you can in advance, so that when a question comes up, you actually have the resources to do it. Although I have to point out, the place to start always when someone expresses a need or a barrier is to say, what works best for you? Before you come through the list of resources that you've developed from somebody else, instead of saying, okay, we're game, but how can we do it? What's best? And if either they don't know, because especially when someone is new to the world of volunteering, they may not know what will work best for them, or you don't necessarily have the resources to provide what the specific growth is. That's when you start to strategize and say, okay, how else might we help you to succeed? We can't quite do that, but here are 5 other strategies we've been told that might be helpful. Do you think any of these might work? But it really just starts with the clear openness, the plan, the messaging that says that you will indeed accommodate, and then, if you'll excuse the expression from a lifetime wheelchair user, walk the walk. Like actually do what it is that you say you're going to do.
If I could like extend that, I think that's great, what you're saying, Matan. I would say additionally, that the training that you've done for staff today and other work that you're going to be doing, discussing issues around accommodations when you have disabled volunteers as a part of it is very important. For me, and I presume for Matan, although I don't want to speak for you, but like in the winter, I can't get my coat on and off myself. Allowing people who are working together to see that people may be asking for different kinds of help. And again, this issue of, can people feel comfortable? Can I say to you, Rachel, could you please help me get my coat off? Or could I say to you, I need to go to the bathroom. I can show you how I go. Can you help me? I think, honestly, that level of discussion is really important, because not everybody needs that kind of help, but for some of us, we do. And the ability to have people who are volunteers or others in the group see that these are things that are okay to do. They're kosher, they're allow us to provide better service, means that you don't necessarily need to be looking at another person to come in and help. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be, depending on the situation and the person, but I know for me, there frequently would not be a need for somebody else if I was with a group and I felt like, I know there's been a discussion, and there are people there who feel comfortable with helping me, helping somebody eat their food, eat their lunch. Those are very basic things that I think, Ian was saying earlier, it can be difficult, as we were saying, to say something like, could you repeat that? It can be really difficult to say, could you please help me eat my lunch? And people may not eat, and there are many, many stories of people who don't go to the bathroom because they can't go to the bathroom. And I think if we're really, really delving into this, especially around service, the ability to talk with disabled individuals and to say, what are some of the things that you really need that you maybe have been unwilling to talk about, could be very beneficial. And not expecting that everybody has to say anything, but I do think that some of these issues are discussed by some people, but something like that being kind of brought up in a discussion would make many people feel good.
And then at the same time, though, again, it's important to stress the fact that, the language, it's not about overcoming, it's about accommodation, it's about living with said disability. It's
Being
not,
a part of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel compelled to share a quick story that draws it together. So when I came to the practice of law, I have attendants that help me in the morning and the evening, right? But I really didn't need that level of help during the day at the law firm, but there was help that I needed. I did need help with my food. I did need a little bit of help with the restroom. And so we came up with this crazy idea. Every 6 months, we'd send an email around the firm that says, Matan needs help with certain things during the day. Anyone who is interested in being part of an email list to which he'll send a quick email whenever he needs help during the day, join. And so there were 50 lawyers, paralegals, secretaries, maintenance folk, everybody, because this went to everybody who joined a list, and every time I needed help, I would just think, who's available to help right now? And someone would come. And I built the most interesting relationships with senior partners, with folks on back office teams that I never would have seen as a lawyer, with everyone you'd imagine, because they were all part of the team to help me out with things like my coat or my lunch, or the fact that I needed a little bit of help to get to the restroom, or whatever it was. And I think it was actually an extraordinarily powerful team building thing for our team, right? So just
And on the
a
other
thought to
hand,
share.
neither Matan or I are saying that this is something that somebody has to do. And also sometimes, like for me, in jobs that I've had, I have had people, I always have people who, as a part of their job, are going to be helping me with personal assistance, part because I travel and other things. So that's just something that I build into job descriptions. But the reality is, the more people see this in their day-to-day lives as something which is normal, the easier it is for people to be able to look at this as something which is normal, and assisting people helps the entire group.
Absolutely. Thank you all for all of that. I'm thinking about, so this past week, I got an email from a mother who I've interacted with many times in non-COVID world, who has a teenager. That this mother in this email wrote to me saying, my daughter is a selective mute. We've worked with her over the last 3 years many times, and she just seems like a shy kid. In New York, we're launching this new teen program. Would she be able to join? She's been able to work with you so many times, but would she be able to join? We have so many, we would be excited to talk to you about all the accommodations she'll need. She's ready, she's eager to serve. And I was so struck. First, I had no idea that her daughter had any disability. She absolutely just seemed like a quieter teenager. And there's so many layers to this mother being struck by the kindness that she felt and experienced from our team that we just thought of as second nature and as working with our participants. It's really fascinating and not the norm for so many with disabilities, which were, I think, Judy and Matan and Ian, you're all lifting up again and again, is making accessibility part of the conversation, making the invisible visible, and making this part of the routine. And those are the steps to take. There are, of course, individual and specific examples we can be giving there, and you've shared many of them, but the work is in that change in attitude and how we approach our communities.
There's also an organization, Rachel, that started a year and a half ago called Communication First. And you may want to look at it. It actually was started by a mother who sounds like her daughter has similar type of disability. And it's really, I think, a very interesting organization because it's working with many people who have various forms of communication issues and disabilities. And so it's both building an increasingly large network of people who have communication disabilities, as well as also being engaged with legislation and various other things, because it's an underserved population of people.
Amazing. We're coming to the point in our time where we wanted to invite questions from any of you who are watching and listening. I'm going to start us off by lifting up some of the comments that we're seeing in the chat and inviting our panelists to respond to one or two of those. This one came from Alyssa in Chicago, who shared that she's seen volunteer projects that when they are recruiting and lay out what the plans are for completing the project ahead of time, people can advocate if they need further accommodations and offer a variety of roles to contribute to a larger project. I'm interested in anyone's thoughts on what that looks like, how we offer various entry points as we're planning for programs and projects, and what that might really look like in action.
Can I give a thought, which is that one of the themes that I talk about a lot, and this is something I struggled with for years until I finally reconciled that it's not that nobody has disabilities, it's that everybody has disabilities because we all have things that we can't do. Like I tried to figure out where the line was drawn, and I finally realized the line is drawn at those things that society calls disability. But why is that important? It's because honestly, as I understand it, a good volunteer project should have multiple entry points for everybody. Like whether it is a particular entry point that I need because I have a mobility impairment, or a particular entry point that someone needs because they're blind, or it's just a particular entry point that someone needs because something that society has not classified as a disability keeps them from another entry point. I feel like multiple entry points is just a good practice in making sure the project meets the volunteers as much as the volunteers meet the project, right? Did that make any sense at all?
That made a lot of sense. And for folks on this call who are not new to repair, and we have a lot of our staff and fellows and core members on here tonight, that's part and parcel to how we approach volunteering, is that the magic is when we can find the match between volunteers' interests and abilities and the needs of partners in the community. And that's really hard to do in practice. Yeah.
And I think, one of the outcomes of your work can be to document how you're proceeding, what you're doing as an organization to really elevate this discussion and make it not a marginalized, but a meaningful discussion. And also to be able to look at some of the issues that we've been discussing. How are volunteers trained? How are volunteers encouraged to be supportive of each other in traditional and non-traditional ways? I think these are really important lessons because we're still so much at the learning level. I think, I don't know if you have people who are volunteers who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, but if not, I think that would be really valuable to really reach out into the Jewish community and expand the group of people that are participating. Because I think really to the extent that the volunteer pool, not just with your group, but in general, really being able to show how volunteers are being selected and how people are learning how to be able to work with a broad group of people, shy people, people who are quite public, and how to get people to be working more together, listening skills, so many things that you wind up doing as an organization where people are learning really good skills that will enhance their ability to continue to move forward. And I think Matan's story earlier about when he went to this camp and his friends felt that it was wrong, he couldn't get in, the more that we can be including a broader slice of disabled individuals, people in our community learn more broadly.
Amazing. We have a bunch of questions in here, and for anybody whose question we don't get to, my apologies in advance, and we hope we'll get to it close enough. I am seeing kind of a theme of questions here around how we bring disability into conversation without becoming tokenizing and patronizing when we choose who we're learning from.
I think, I think recognizing invisible disabilities and intellectual developmental disabilities is something that I do think kind of needs to be a little bit developed a little bit more, and again, make it beyond the very harmful. I mean, I've never actually seen it, but I know like Rain Man, for example, was quite a negative depiction of intellectual, or of autism rather. Yeah, and again, as I was stressing, it's about living with and not overcoming disability.
I think it goes beyond disability, right? Volunteers are giving their time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that Rachel and everybody who's been in a position of recruiting volunteers, there's a lot of compromising that goes on, right? There's some steadfast things that you have to be able to do. And then I think that organizations also look for the strongest qualities that people have and do your best to allow those to flourish. And I think that's what's really important when, we're talking about really trying to reach out to the breadth of the disability community, is everyone has something to contribute. And I think, really when you look at Israel, and this started, I guess, I don't know, Matan, you would know better than I, but probably before 2010, when people in Israel recognized that when you're 18, you serve in the military. If you don't serve in the military, then you are not considered to be equal. And so while not all disabled people can serve in the military, there are roles that people can play. And for me, what I've seen in the program that's been really valuable is there are roles that people with various forms of disabilities who are not going to be able to serve in the front line, which hopefully we don't have to do anyway, but so that they can feel a part of the community. And when people talk to them in the community about what you're doing, they're doing work which is comparable to what other people are doing. So I don't know, Matan, you want to say anything?
Well, and I think what I'll just sort of add to bring in is that you avoid tokenism because it's real value, right? The programs that Judy is talking about, the people that Judy is talking about are doing real important things for the state of Israel. They're not doing things because somebody found make work, because somebody found a role that wasn't actually meaningful. It's because we did the work to find what folks could do. And I firmly believe, like, this is not something I'm saying for puffery's sake, that every human being, disabled or otherwise, has something unique to contribute to the world. And so we avoid tokenism by making sure that the opportunities that we're creating are giving them the opportunity to contribute that unique thing, disabled or otherwise. Because if we create an opportunity that does not allow someone to share their gifts with the world, then it is tokenizing. It's creating an opportunity for opportunity's sake. But as long as we allow people to share their strengths, their gifts, their talents, tokenism falls away because they're just doing a job, right? So
yeah, that really resonates, and I think is important. We live in a space where we're afraid to sometimes make moves because of a fear of tokenizing. And I think if we frame it in that this is a cultural shift, this is a change we're making and committing to, there's a real difference there. The next,
I want to say, I think it's another area of learning. It's one thing to say one is going to expand the group that we're working with. It's another thing to really be able to speak with people who have different types of disabilities, people who may be involved in supporting people, really help determine, good, valuable volunteer activities so that it isn't tokenistic. But again, I think being able to do this is a real ability to demonstrate the kinds of work that needs to be done to make this successful.
We're coming up on time, so I want to just list some of the questions that came up that we're not going to be able to answer, but I think are important for everyone to have and percolate on. One is what we all might imagine the role of technology will be as we move into a post-COVID world, as we've seen so many technology tools become integral to how we work and make for more accessible spaces. There's another question around the right for somebody with disabilities to become a rabbi. And I think there's some beautiful examples of rabbis with disabilities. There's another question around, how people with disabilities might advocate for themselves in spaces where there isn't common language. And one more question is, how we might teach teenagers, and I'd say also children, about the concept of disability and ability and valuing different voices. I'm not going to invite anybody to respond to any of those massive questions right now, but I want to
But I
let
do
you
want to
know.
say,
You want
I
to say
do
what?
want to say, sorry, I don't like the word ability because I believe everyone has abilities. I believe, we are disabled people or people with disabilities, and if you don't have a disability, you're non-disabled.
Thank you. And I'm good with all of that, and there's so much I could sit and listen to the three of you speak all night. But I'm gonna let Molly and Miranda, the real Miranda, close us up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. With an interest on ending on time, out of respect for everyone's time and potential Zoom fatigue, I'm going to wrap us up with a final question for the panelists and for all of you in the audience, if you would like to share. As we've said a few times, we really want to be moving past this idea of JDAM being just the month of February, or just one program being the emphasis here. And so for all of you in the audience, if you would like to put in the chat one thing that you're thinking about for a next step for yourself, whether that is some research you're going to do, maybe watching the rest of that clip that comes from the 504 documentary, maybe it's a conversation with colleagues or within your organization, or if you are involved with a local Jewish institution, maybe in terms of service, would love to see some of that in the chat. And then for our panelists, in a sentence or two, we would love to know what's next for you. What are you working on? What are you continuing to think about? So we can get a little bit of a window into what's coming down the pipeline for all three of you. So Ian, we'll start with you, and then Matan, and then Judy. So just a sentence.
So I'm tentatively going to be starting the Spring Service Corps member, pending any permanent job or full-time job employment. But yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. Yeah. And I actually add a different space to this time, specifically the Crown Heights JCC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ian. We're excited to have you for another cohort. Matan, what's next for you?
Well, I'm privileged to be able to do this for a living. So in some ways, what's next for me is keeping on full steam. But what is next for me in the immediate short term is to really focus on mobilizing lots of folks with disabilities in the area of civic engagement and in the area of advocating for the policies that are most important in our lives. And I'm really excited to say that I've hired someone new who'll be joining my team on Monday with that focus, and I look forward to guiding them to do that. So that's one exciting thing coming down the pike.
Wonderful, and we're excited to follow your work and that of respectability as well. Judy, how about you? What is next?
So I think it's not next as much as continuing, like Matan was saying. So I was privileged to meet Molly many years ago when I think you just reached out, or we were somewhere and we decided to meet. And I think for me, it's continuing to meet with people who have an interest in looking at how to advance inclusion, and supporting the voices of disabled people so that we are speaking up and out about what we need, and looking at it really as a rights-based issue, and continuing to do work within all movements to elevate the voices of disabled individuals. And I want to just say that, the work that you're all doing is really something that you should feel very proud of. And all of you, I believe, are Jewish. I don't know how many of you are active in synagogues or other organizations, but I think what you're learning from here is something you should take to the other groups that you're working with, to really be asking questions regarding whether or not the same type of work that's happening now is happening in these other groups. You need to see yourselves as multipliers, because you're all leaders, and you all are people who are becoming more and more empowered. And it's no one person that does any of this. It's really the collective voices of all of us. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this tonight, because you really are agents of change, and you should feel that, and you should use it.
Well, Judy, hearing that come from you as one of the agents of change in this movement is incredibly powerful. So thank you. I will take that to heart and honored that you and Matan and Ian were able to make time for all of us tonight. I will share, Repair will be following up with all of you lovely participants with a recording and volunteer opportunities in each of your cities and national offerings with Miranda and the virtual team if you are not in a Repair city. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Rachel, for moderating and being a fierce advocate in this space for many years. And Miranda, the real and one and only Miranda, for doing all the work behind the scenes. Thank you so much, and the emotional support, much appreciated. Thank you to all of you. Love your thoughts about next steps in the chat, and we look forward to connecting again soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eat.
Thank you.